Blink.
And a one and a two and a blee blah blue. Do 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 do. Boop 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 boo. Boop 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 boo. I'm trying to read chapter 4 again. That was a deep cut summer school reference. 1986 Carl Reiner film starring Mark Harmon, Kirstie Alley, that one gal from Melrose Place, one idiot jock from Heathers, uh, Dave and Chainsaw, obviously. I don't think anybody else in that movie ever did anything good. I didn't realize Mark Harmon was on St. Elsewhere. I added that to my little watch list, even though medical drama is kind of. But I've always, my entire life, I've heard about how great St. Elsewhere is, and it was always because that show was on from what 82 to 88, something like that, and people that I like respected were like, "Oh, it's like a critical darling," and I was like, "Oh, great." I don't. I'm 10, so I'm not going to be. But eventually, I said to myself, 20, 35 years in the future, you'll be able to just to watch it without even having to put your shoes on. Growing up, I don't know if you knew this, but in the 80s, you had to wear your shoes in order to watch television. Well, gotten this off to a confusing start. Okay, picks of the week this week. I'm still, again, oh boy, if you guys could see the stack of comics I have to read. Wait, I have to put my far away glasses on. Oh my goodness, that is a lot of comic books. I'm gonna guess that's like 5 weeks worth. I'm not gonna look it up right now, but somewhere in that neighborhood. I'm a month, maybe a month and change behind. So again, I'm picking comics that because like just last night I was reading some of the AXE books, the Judgment Day crossover, and I was like, oh man, I haven't read this in so long, and it's already old. Like the sixth issue of Judgment Day just came out recently, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll get to that by Judgment Day. I don't know. Look, you didn't come here to hear my problems. First up this week, American Jesus: Revelation #1 by Mark Millar and Peter Gross. This was a book originally entitled Chosen. When the first volume, this is the third volume, when the first volume appeared, geez Louise, almost 20 years ago, it was called Chosen. And then Mark Millar sold it as some sort of media property, a movie or a television program. And so they rebranded it American Jesus because that's what the movie slash TV show, I don't remember which one it was going to be called. And then a few years ago, just a few years ago, within the last 5 years, I want to say, yeah, that sounds about right. He did a second volume, and I was under the impression, as I have been with like Magic Order and other books that Mark Millar has done, they did a second series because I assumed the show would be dropping soon or the movie would be coming soon or announced or anything. Nothing. And now this one, and I mean, it's entirely possible that Mark Millar just wants to tell some good comic book stories, which he does do, I find, and didn't have an eye towards some sort of Hollywood adaptation down the line, but I think you and I both know that that's not true. My stupid computer screen is reflecting to me in my glasses in here, and it's driving me nuts. As the pirate with the steering wheel on his crotch once said. Also, this week I got Damn Them All by Simon Spurrier and Charlie Adlard. This is a new series from Boom, which is still hanging in there. Boom Studios is like a smaller indie. Well, I guess not really. They're more of a larger indie. When I was a kid, it was the big two, Marvel and DC, and then you had the indies, which are all but within that scene, more and more publishers, began to grow as they aimed their, they cultivated an audience outside of superhero comic book readers. And then Image came along and really opened the indies up for superhero stuff or for genre stuff anyway. And so there's still a bunch of little publishers, but they're getting bigger. And Boom is one of the ones that started off really small and has only grown. Dynamite's another one. Oni was kind of another one, but I feel like they're not publishing as much. IDW though is one. I guess none of that really makes any difference. This book is about, and the solicit about like a satanic assassin. So I'm not sure if he's killing people for Satan or, you know, against. Look, all I know is it's written by Simon Spurrier, who I've been a big fan of for some time. He's never really gone away. I want to say he even still does. He was one of these, I believe, a 2000 AD guy, an English guy, and then he got work from Marvel. And I don't know if I haven't seen it yet, but there's that X-Men show called Legion on FX. That's largely, to my understanding, based on Simon Spurrier's run on X-Men Legacy. And I think I've mentioned him before. I think I talked about him not that long ago, but he does a lot. He's really good because he does a lot of. He has a lot of fun with dialogue. He's good at writing dialogue. He's good at comic book dialogue in particular because he really knows how to kind of use the room, so to speak. You know, most people don't think of, even comic book nerds like myself don't even think of lettering as being all that important. It's, lettering is like the last thing that they do in the process, right? Yeah, one of the last things. And most people, myself included, always just assumed that was some sort of typesetting job. Like you didn't even need to be an artiste. But I only found out somewhat recently that the letterer is also in charge of like the sound effects and stuff like that. And Tom Orzakowski, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, was the first guy to when I learned this about lettering, he was the first guy I was like, oh, that explains why he got so much work back in the 80s. Orzachowski was the letterer during the Claremont Byrne run on the Uncanny X-Men, which is largely considered one of the finest. And yeah, he really would go, like, his lettering was distinctive. It was recognizable as comic book lettering, but it was also recognizable as Orzachowski lettering. And I remember noticing this, and maybe it's not just Claremont, but I remember noticing as a kid that Claremont would often have the characters would talk nonstop. All of Claremont's work is extremely wordy. And so naturally, these characters would get cut off in mid sentence a lot. And usually, like, whoa, like a squawk or something like that because something's happening. God forbid some action would happen and a character would stop talking. But Orzachowski always would, like, so you'd be lettering, and then blow, like a sound effect right in the word balloon. That's not really what Simon Spurrier does. But Simon Spurrier does do a lot of, like, because now lettering, I'm under the impression, is all digital. It's all done with computers, like everything else these days. So you would think that maybe it wouldn't loan itself to the sort of art creativity that hand lettering can, but that's not true. Simon Spurrier is really good at. He's not the only one. He's by far far and away uses this the most often, where he'll shrink the font on some dialogue if it's a whisper and go, you know what I mean, stuff like that. There's a character in the X books, Blindfold, is that her name? It's a character I was not very familiar with before X-Men Legacy, and I believe she was in Generation X, which wasn't a book that I read a lot of when in the 90s. Her power is that she can see the future. She's blindfolded, hence the name, and she is told the future by, like, it's not ghosts, but she hears voices and sees people. And so whenever Spurrier writes her dialogue, especially, she'll be talking and then she'll say, sorry. Like she has to stop and apologize to the voices in her head. And it's really well done the way he does it. And then Charlie Adlard, I don't know if this is of any interest to anyone, but was the artist on The Walking Dead for most of the series, I want to say. Tony Moore was the original artist, and then he left after the first couple years, I want to say. I mean, his money was in the bank at that point for sure, and I think he still did the covers for The Walking Dead through the rest, or at least for a while after he stopped drawing. I seem to recall there being a falling out between him and Kirkman, but I shouldn't speculate on things that I can only half remember. I never got into The Walking Dead, so I don't know. But I do like Adlard's artwork, so that will make for a lovely pick of the week. And then over to this one. Okay. So yeah, I'm still falling way behind. Yeah, what are you gonna do? First up, Crypt of Shadows #1. The thing I think when I was going on my rant last week about the history of horror comics, what I think I neglected to mention, and I won't repeat the whole thing again, save us both that trouble. Marvel was so like DC when so in the 70s when horror comics kind of returned from the grave, you had Marvel, you had DC, and then you had Warren magazines who were they may have even preceded the return of horror comics in the 70s because they were a magazine. Eerie and creepy and comics like that were magazine size and they would have some text in there. So I think they might have been able to get around the comics code with that. That was how Mad Magazine did it for years. Um, those were direct descendants of the EC comics. Creepy and Eerie were anthology horror comics narrated by Uncle Creepy or Uncle Eerie, depending. I think it was Uncle Eerie too. Very much a crypt keeper sort of a character, though. And then DC, you had House of Secrets and House of Mystery. One was narrated by Kane, and the other one was by Abel. I don't remember which is which. Kane and Abel were two characters that DC had in their horror line that were like crypt keeper type characters. They told you the stories, and Kane was constantly killing Abel. Right? Yeah, that was like a running gag. Um, Marvel never really did it. Marvel never really did an anthology that I can think of because Marvel was their bread and butter was superheroes, and they were doing them better than anybody in the 70s. They were still outselling, or they still, I think they had just begun to outsell DC. Um, and they were also, I believe, at the time, they could only have so many titles. There was a large period of time in the Silver Age, especially in the 60s, and I want to say into the 70s, where Marvel Comics was actually owned by not owned by DC, but they were owned by the same distributor that owned DC. So the distributor was like, yeah, we're only going to distribute 12 titles. This is why for a long time in the 60s, Captain America and Iron Man shared a title. The Hulk and Ant-Man shared a title, Tales to Astonish. Wait. Yeah, Tales to Astonish was Captain America and Iron Man. And then Tales of Suspense. I might have those backwards. But Tales of Suspense, Strange Tales was Doctor Strange and Nick Fury. I remember that. But they had to combine because these characters were popular, but they couldn't publish any more comics than they already were without canceling some of the titles they already had. So they would combine them. So maybe that was why Marvel never waded into the sort of horror anthology end of things. And I'm really trying to think now, and I don't think they ever did. The closest they might have ever come were like Creatures on the Loose and stuff, which were largely from the 50s. Monsters Unleashed and Where Monsters Dwell and stuff like that. They had all these monster comics in the 50s, which was their way of getting around the comics code. So they could still do horror comics, but they were just kaiju. They weren't really, things returning from the grave and stuff, which was what, or murders run rampant and stuff, which was what the objection people had to EC and stuff like that. So then, I mean, it's interesting, but it's also kind of, So all of Marvel's horror stuff is essentially superhero comics, which I like that it is that way. Like I I enjoy that about Marvel, but it doesn't necessarily make for a great horror stuff. You know what I mean? Also, this is, and I mean, I don't want to be unkind to anyone who worked on this book, but this is a cash grab. This is it's Halloween time. People are in the mood to read Halloween type stuff. Dorks like me haven't seen Man Thing on the cover of a book for a while, especially after he just showed up in that Werewolf by Night special, which if you haven't watched that on Disney Plus, I highly recommend. I don't generally highly recommend. I enjoy all the MCU output, but I don't feel like the need to. Oh, did you have you seen this yet? Werewolf by Night, though, I do because it was super violent and it was a lot of fun, and it had what's his name, Gail Garcia Bernal, who is yum yum yummy. I've had a no homo boner for that kid since Y Mama Tambien. So Werewolf by Night. Tell him Jimmy sent you. Also read Tales of the Human Target #1. This was very clearly, like I would think I was saying last week, meant to tide us over. This is the current Human Target title, which is written by Tom King and drawn by Greg Smallwood, is a 12-issue series, and it's also the first time that this character, the Human Target, has interacted or really even been in the same universe as the DC heroes. So in that um, storyline, and it's a very private eye noir storyline, which really does fit in with Human Target, especially Human Target as done by Peter Milligan in the early 2000s. Greg Smallwood is an incredible artist, but I can't imagine he works quickly. So I feel like he probably got about halfway through the book, maybe a little bit more, and was like, I'm going to be a little behind on the remaining issues. So they did this. Now, Smallwood still drew the interstitial parts, but you have three different superheroes: Guy Gardner, Fire, who was on the Justice League in the 80s also, and a third person that I can't remember now. And they're all telling the reader, but clearly somebody they're talking to. Oh, Booster Gold was the other one. They're all three of them are talking about Christopher Chance and how they know him and how they first met him and stuff. And so they all fit together, um, and it was good. It would have tided me over until the current issue of Human Target, which just came out this week, I think. Except that I only just read it this week because it wasn't ordered. Finally, Deadly Class #56. This is the final issue, and it was perfect. Frankly, it was. Rick Remender did a book in the teens called Low, which I couldn't get into. It was. I don't even really remember what the story was, except that I knew it. I know it took place underwater, and it was kind of like a Prince Namor thing, I guess, maybe for Remender. And he talks in the at least in the trades about trying to write. Yeah, that was it. I think it's the story is that there's like this undersea kingdom, and the queen, they get invaded, and the queen escapes with the children, maybe their father, and is trying to just keep her family going and try to get her kingdom back or something along those lines. It's a tragic story. But he said in like the back matter that he was trying to write a positive story because he's not a positive person, which you can tell from the bands he likes and from the comics he writes. and on a personal level, I love bummer stuff. I mean, I always have, but I also enjoy an upbeat story, believe it or not. But I didn't find Low to be that. I don't know if that was why I didn't like the book because he was trying to be optimistic and it wasn't. That was the vibe I got at the time. But I have to rethink that now because this ends. Deadly Class actually ends on a high note, which did not see that coming. I mean, this is a story like I said last week. It's a story about a high school for future assassins. It's ridiculous. It's very silly, but it almost immediately got to be just about being disenfranchised teenagers. And especially in the late 20th century, I'm going to relate to that very easily. But yeah, the bad guys are vanquished at the end, and the good guys, you know, most of them are still dead. But we got a very nice ending to it. I was very, very pleased. I don't remember the ending to Black Science, if I'm being honest with you, but I think it was also like a happier ending. I should read that book again for sure. And I don't think I haven't forgotten it because it wasn't memorable. I've forgotten it because I read too many comics. It's been years. So, but I don't think I'm going to forget the end of Deadly Class anytime soon because I think I was really expecting. I mean, not necessarily. No, yeah, no, I was. I was necessarily I was expecting because this arc has been kind of rough on Marcus, our main character. But since it jumps so many years, it jumps from 1990, I want to say, up to now over 6 issues. Um, yeah, it wasn't going great. And there was like entire issues about clearly about Rick Remender trying to make a TV show out of this comic and stuff like that. And that in real life got canceled immediately. So I knew that wasn't going to end great for Marcus either. But yeah, it was really good. And I mean, even the cover is very, you know, pleasant. And I think Saya here is wearing a Germs shirt, which is even cooler. Oh, and I can't remember this kid's name, but he's very clearly, to me anyway, wearing a Sex Pistols t-shirt. Oh, and that's a Minor Threat t-shirt. You can see it even from that far away. I mean, suffice it to say, and I'll sign off on this, but one of the best things about Deadly Class was that it was about punk rockers. And I've been a punk rocker. I joined up in '94, late '93 maybe. But I remember it was '94 because in 1994 on May Day, it may not have been May 1st, but it was like that first weekend of May. There was a an all day local bands concert in San Diego, California, in the Starlight Theater, what used to be the Starlight Theater, and I had the best day of my life. I made out with a girl. I saw 30 bands, not in that order. And then my mom came and picked me up. And I remember I got in the car and I looked at my mom. I said, Mom, I'm a punk rocker. So proud of myself. And my mom went, huh. And she said, Well, what about not joining? Why about not belonging? You mean I was like such an iconoclast? And I said, Yeah, that's the best part. I found a whole group of people who don't want to join up. I mean, I was 16, a little naive, but that's still more. I mean, it wasn't entirely true, obviously, but it still is more or less what it is. And to this day, I love the punk rock. Can't get enough of it. And it's obviously not one of those things that you can explain, but it's the greatest. And Deadly Class is one of the few comics to really capture that, to really capture, and it does that with comics too, actually, because Remender's a big comic book nerd. I'm just saying, me and Rick Remender should hang out more. Is really what I'm driving at, but somebody won't even return my phone calls. Well, you know what? At least I'm trying with this relationship. All right. I'm ending on a lame bit because I didn't really know how to end the punk rock thing. Okay. God save the Queen.